Hello everyone, this is Logan Keister here, standing in this grove of Douglas fir here on western region of Oregon in the Willamette Valley. And yeah, I just wanted to do a quick little video talking about this plant right here. This is Oregon Grape. This particular one is Berberis nervosa, formerly Mahonia nervosa, then formerly Berberis nervosa. Now it's back to Berberis nervosa. Taxonomists are finally getting their things together, I guess, and realized it is truly a Berberis. Yeah, so Oregon Grape is in the Berberidaceae family. Easy to remember with the Berberis genus. And it's just a really iconic plant of the Pacific Northwest, especially in these lower elevation coniferous forests. I'm thinking below 3,500 feet. I'm probably about 500 feet elevation now. And it's just one of the dominant understory plants. You find it commonly see growing around Salao, Gaultheria chalone, which is another really common understory plant of these coniferous forests. And so interesting things about the botany of this plant. So you can see it has these long, spiny leaves, but technically in botany, they would say that this is one leaf here, the whole thing, and that each of these individuals would be a leaflet. So it's a compound of many leaflets upon one leaf. And they have these kind of spiny margins. You've got a leaf, so you can get a closer view. Spiny margins to the leaves, very sharp, but not too sharp. I often walk around barefoot and in shorts through the Oregon Grape, and it does not, the spininess does not bother me. Of course, those of you who know me know I have kind of a high tolerance for pain, but that's another story. So yeah, when they're in flower, they'll typically make these little yellow, great golden yellow bell-shaped flowers, and which will then turn into nice purple fruit, which has a nice sour flavor to it. I've talked to people who've made wines from it. Yeah. And there are other species of Oregon Grape out there. Another one would be the Berberis aquifolium. So what differentiates this one from the aquifolium is, the leaves, they're a bit shiny, but the aquifolium really has this like kind of nice shimmer to it. And it grows a lot taller. It almost grows more like a vine. I'll see it wrapping around trees, growing quite tall, whereas this one I don't usually see getting above 2.5, maybe 3 feet high, but typically they're more in the around 2 feet high. Yeah. So this herb is one of our classic bitter herbs, or one of our classic bitter remedies. And bitters are just really amazing. And I feel like it's one of those flavor profiles we miss a lot here in the West. And, that's mainly because it's a lot of our like wild greens and just our greens in general tend to have nice, strong, bitter flavors to them. And, fewer and fewer people are eating greens, even things like kale and collard greens. But it's really important getting that bitter flavor, because the way the bitters act, and so when I'm talking about using the bitters from this, I'm talking about working with the root or the rhizome. So here, I guess I'll show you a quick little bit. So typically we say we're harvesting Oregon Grape root, but really it's Oregon Grape rhizome. So I just snapped this off here. So here's the whole plant, as you can see. Yeah. And So a rhizome, the difference between a rhizome and a root is a rhizome's like a underground stem, basically. So this one plant here was probably connected to this plant right here. It's like these branching rhizomes that they're underground stems that kind of branch off, and then they make little rootlets. The roots are these very little, tiny little fibers. So those are the true roots. But we call it Oregon grape root just because it sounds sexier than Oregon grape rhizome, I guess. Yeah. So one thing we can tell when we're working Oregon grape root here. So notice that. Yeah, I just did chew off the outer bark. So you could see this beautiful inner bark that has this like beautiful yellow color. And they say that indicates it's berberine content. It also has that doctrinal signatures of that yellow color being similar to bile secreted by the liver, because this herb has a strong liver affinity. Yeah. So I can even just get a taste of that. I got a taste of that bitter. And so the way the bitter works is it works by a reflex action, meaning it's like as soon as our tongue tastes the bitter, it sends a cascade of signals throughout our bodies, typically relating to the GI tract. So one thing I'm noticing already is my mouth is starting to salivate just from getting that little bit of bitter taste. I'm getting an increase of saliva in the mouth, and that being one of the first parts of digestion, because there's actually different enzymes. I think one's typically for carbohydrates that are in the mouth. So that increase in salivation helps with the digestive process. And then from there, it's like a big thing with our digestion is there's just like so many things it's like so much about timing and how these processes go around at the right timing. So one of the first things we might think about is peristalsis. So for those of you who don't know, peristalsis, it's like that smooth muscle movement in like the esophagus and through our intestines that helps move food along the way. So this helps out with the timing of peristalsis and the tonacity of the smooth muscle to allow it to push the food through, so the food's not just staying stuck in one area, and we kind of helps gently push it through with that smooth muscle movement. Excuse me. And another thing we notice that's important with timing is the opening and closing of various sphincters. So like the esophageal sphincter, the sphincter that goes to our esophagus, or the duodenal sphincter, and various ones that just basically close behind, the food gets through, and then it closes to make sure that digestive juices and acids aren't coming up. We think of like acid reflux being something like that, and that can end up leading to ulcers, duodenal ulcers, esophageal ulcers. So working with the bitter flavor on a regular basis helps to get that timing down when it comes to our sphincters, that open and close to allow digestive stuff to get through and digestive acids not to come back up. However, I will mention this is good for preventing acid reflux. If you're young and you're worried you might be prone to acid reflux, start working with bitters now. If you already have acid reflux, the actual stimulation of those, because they also stimulate digestive juices to flow out. That's another part of the timing, is when hydrochloric acid is going to come out, and when bicarbonate is supposed to come out, in our stomach and our intestines with these different enzymes. So it can actually increase that amount of acid in the stomach. So if we're already having acid reflux, taking bitter may stimulate it to create more acid, and it could actually cause more issues. So typically with acid reflux, we have a protocol that involves working with mucilaginous herbs. But this isn't one on acid reflux. I just wanted to mention that. But it's definitely like something good for like training our bodies, how to digest properly, how to get the timing right. And so I think bitters is a really good way to preventing future issues dealing with like acid reflux and other issues like that. Yeah. So yeah, this yellow coloring, like I said, they say it's similar to bile, the yellow color of bile in the liver, and indicates its berberine content. So bile, it helps with the secretion of bile. They consider it herb with a strong affinity for the liver, meaning that it helps with the liver's ability to break down nutrition that's coming through and to detoxify things. Everything that goes into the liver flows through this one vein, this one large vein called the portal vein. So everything we ever consume goes through our liver. All those weird experimental era that we had in our teen years or in college or in our mid-20s, or if we're still doing them now, I'm not judging. But all the weird things we put in our bodies, be they foods or psychoactive maybe, we all had those times. Some of us anyways. It really, all of that has to go through our liver and has to be processed by our liver. And over time, if we're overburdening our livers, we're exposed to lots of toxins in our environment. We're consuming lots of foreign substances that our body's not used to, or we're just eating too much. That's something I deal with. I eat a lot. There can be congestion in the portal vein, which leads into the liver, and congestion in the liver as well. So these Oregon grape seems to have this affinity for helping our liver to kind of stimulating it in a way, I guess you could say. It's like stimulating that process to push things through, to help break down, to help excrete things from the body. So it can be good for people. I've noticed it's good for, oh man, I shouldn't mention that one, but UAs, if you know what they are. I shouldn't go too deep into that, but yeah, there's processing, excreting drugs from your system, things that might show up on a urine test, or if you're using drugs daily, some kind of substance every day that you're gaining a tolerance to. You'll notice if you start working with Oregon grape, you'll have it'll break down those substances faster. It's also good for excretion, the excretory processes. So I almost see it as kind of a Scorpio type of thing. If you know much about Scorpio or medical astrology, Scorpio is associated a lot with our excretory functions. So the anus, the bladder, the penis, the yoni. It's kind of works through those excretory processes, helping stuff leave our body, evacuate our body in a timely manner. That's why its opposite is Taurus, which represents, our jaw kind of taking in materials. And so it's that dual nature between Scorpio and Taurus that helps, one helping us eat, the other helping us excrete. So I feel it's like very Scorpionic because not only does it have like that sharp texture to leaves, but it's almost like, kind of looks like a scorpion's tail, doesn't it, a little bit? The spiky claws in the front, tail in the back. That's one way to look at it, but I associate more with that excretory process. It seems to help with like stimulating fluid secretion. So immediately, like it's a cute thing. Like I said, it caused me to start salivating, causes secretion, digestive juices. But you have to realize over time that kind of has like a net drying effect, because it's like taking all these fluids to make all these processes happen. But then eventually those fluids are going to leave our body. So it's important to make sure if we're working with bitters regularly, including Oregon grape, that we're taking time to hydrate and make sure we're getting plenty of nutrition, feeding ourselves well. And if you're someone who's prone to dry skin, looking to make sure that we're drinking plenty of water, as well as getting good oils, good EPA, DHA, fish oil, or some kind of vegan alternative. Yeah. So yeah, another thing with the bile and the liver, this is another reason I see as scorpionic herb, plant, is that it has like a really strong affinity for our immune functions. It's like I said, with the yellow color, a lot of those berberine containing plants are our typical alternative plants. Alteratives being herbs that help engage that kind of metabolic function, that anabolism building up, that catabolism breaking down, that, so it's like this constant state of taking pieces, pulling them apart, and then building them back into structures in our body, the very structures that help run our body. So this helps a lot with the breakdown and assimilation of nutrients, and as well as speeding up the metabolic process that are involved in our immune systems, making more white blood cells, NK cells, lymphocytes, various, things that help like support our immune system really, and just kind of get the processes flowing and going. And so there's been, like, I mentioned the berberine thing because it's interesting. This is one that a lot of the older herbalists like to mention, this research study, because it's one of the few where they were like comparing like an isolated extract of a constituent of the plant with the whole plant itself. So in this case, they found an isolated extract of berberine would actually have antimicrobial effects. It was like a constituent that could kill off certain microbes that weren't beneficial. Oh, just found a mushroom. What is that? Huh, that's cute. Sorry, just saw a little mushroom, kind of got me distracted. Anyways, so it contains this berberine, and they found it was antimicrobial. However, when it came in the presence of drug-resistant microorganisms, a lot of these organisms, like these bacteria, had this thing called an efflux pump. So as soon as like an antibiotic or an antimicrobial compound gets inside of the bacteria, the efflux pump would simply pump out the antibiotics or the antimicrobial compound, and rendering it kind of basically like, okay, this isolated constituent doesn't work. However, what they found with when they used the whole isolated extract of, or not isolated, the non-isolated whole extract of Oregon grape, it had other constituents in it that would help inhibit that multi-drug resistant efflux pump. So basically they said that the plant works better with all of its constituents rather than just the isolated berberine. And I think I see this a lot in the herbal research that goes out there, as we're trying to find out what the key constituents are and how to work with just the constituents, because then, it's a lot easier to patent off of, and that's how it fits in with our modern medical research. It's a lot easier to look at things in isolation rather than, how they occur out in nature. It's makes things easier to study, but it doesn't always fit into the picture of reality of what goes on in the actual world. So, and so what does this mean? What can we do with this information? Well, one thing for myself, one thing I learned from my teacher, one of my teachers, Steve Yeager, he used to get styes a lot, which are basically like these kind of like small inflammations that happen on the eye. And I got one too. So I used Steve's method for this, where you basically got some Oregon grape tincture, an alcohol extract of Oregon grape, and you mix in about I think it was something like a dropper full into about 4 ounces of water, and you put it in a cup, and you make an isotonic solution. So an isotonic solution is just water with salt in it, but it's just at the right level as to not be too hypertonic, where there's too much salt in there, so it's more like salt water. You just want this like kind of equal balance. And you can look it up. I believe it's something like 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon per 4 to 8 ounces of water. You can look it up. It's easy information to find. So anyways, you take that water with the isotonic solution with salt in there. You add your Oregon grape to it, and then you just do an eye wash. You just hold your eye up, you hold a cup over it, and you just kind of blink it in and roll your eye around, make sure it gets to all the parts of the eye. And that really worked for Steve a lot. And then I tested it on myself personally, and it works really well for styes or chalaisons, which is a more infected version of a stye. And so that's thought to be due to some of those antimicrobial compounds. And then for the one with the multi-drug resistant pump, I got a really bad MRSA infection, staph infection, while I was in Peru. And it was, I had a salve I'd made that had a mix of a few different herbs, but there was Oregon Grape in there. And the Oregon Grape put on there really, it just like took it away. It was like barely anything. Those of you who know MRSA, it's very nasty, and oftentimes it is drug resistant to many antibiotics that are out there. So working with the Oregon Grape allowed me to avoid having to take antibiotics. However, I'm not by any means suggesting we don't take our antibiotics. Antibiotics are life-saving drugs. And if you got a really bad MRSA infection and you're taking our Oregon Grape and nothing, and it's not working, just like get antibiotics. You know, it's not worth risking losing your leg or whatever arm. You know, I had mine on my ankle, so that would yeah, my life without my ankle and everything below it, meaning my foot, would not have been fun. So I was definitely at that point where I was about to take antibiotics, but the Oregon Grape was just working so effectively that I felt confident that it was going to prevail, and it did. So but that also means that, unlike we talk a lot about herb drug interactions, herbs that you know, may not meld well with a lot of our pharmaceutical drugs. That's the great thing about Oregon Grape, though, is it actually improves the effectiveness of antibiotics due to that multi-drug resistant pump inhibitor. So it has that efflux pump inhibitor that stops the pathogen, the bacteria, from pumping out the antibiotics. So if you're taking antibiotics, taking them with Oregon Grape is actually going to help improve the effectiveness. And I had an experience recently where I was taking topical antibiotics, and I was going to see the doctor, and he wanted me to take oral antibiotics originally. But I'm like, hey, you know, is it all right if I try something topical first and see if that helps? And he said, okay, I'm open to that, but if it's not improving, then we'll probably move you to the oral ones. And so I did it in combination with Oregon Grape, and he was really amazed by how fast it worked with bringing it down. So I'm all for the integration of herbs and antibiotics, because they really are life-saving drugs. But if we can find ways to use less antibiotics, you know, they're very intense medicines. So I try to save them only for when they're needed. But certainly when they're needed, they're very, very needed, and they're life-saving drugs. So just want to make that little disclaimer there. Yeah, that is great. So we have like these herbal allies, and a really great thing about this is one plant that we often see over harvested is golden seal. So golden seal is another berberine containing plant. It has a similar yellowness to the root. And yeah, this contains like the similar compounds as does golden seal. Golden seal seems to have more of an affinity for being astringent to the sinuses and bringing down inflammation in the sinuses. So if you have sinusitis, inflammation of the sinuses, you may want to work with golden seal instead. But I think for any other circumstances, you could work with Oregon Grape instead. And I just like working with Oregon Grape because it's just so much more prevalent than golden seal is. You know, United Plant Savers lists it as a species to watch, you know, one that we shouldn't be out harvesting willy-nilly. And I think the reason they say this is because the plant at the edge of its range, like if I was in like somewhere in California, more in the northern part of California, you know, I'd start seeing less and less Oregon Grape as I start moving south. And if I'm like harvesting some plant on the edge of its range, you know, and there's very little of it around, I could be causing ecological damage. You know, I'm like taking this herb out of its natural habitat and in a place where it's not very prevalent. However, where I am right now, you can't see from the camera, but I'm literally surrounded by thousands and thousands of this Oregon Grape, this Berberis nervosa. So I feel pretty confident that if I harvest from here, I won't be causing ecological damage. And besides the fact, this is also Forest Service land that is designated to be cut within the next few years. So this is all going to be clear cut in a few years. So, you know, I'm harvesting from a stand that's already replanted trees. It's kind of like a monoculture of Douglas fir. and eventually it's going to be chopped down. So I feel like, working with some of the medicinals that are growing here in prevalence, I don't feel like I'm making ecological damage. Another great thing about harvesting it, if we want to think ecologically, so this is what I recommend. So like we have the whole plant here, and so the rhizome, basically you can see there's moss growing up on it about here. So this is the part that's above the ground, and then this is all the part that's below the ground. And the below the ground part, that's the part we want to harvest. So I can see right here there's a little rootlet. So I could like chop it off right here where that little rootlet is, and then I could just stick it back in the dirt and it'll regrow. And then that leaves me with the whole bottom section to be used into medicine. And I only took off a small section. This plant goes much deeper. I'm sure it goes out a few feet and connects to many other plants. So I could dig this up carefully, get a nice few long sections of root, and then just replant it. And my teachers have harvested off of the same stand Oregon grape with students for years and have had them do this technique. And they say that they haven't seen no difference in the size of the stand, and they'll even find the old ones that they did it, and it'll make this like little juncture where it was cut and split. So I know that this method's been confirmed to work, and it seems to not affect the health of the stand. So if you're going to be harvesting, make sure you're in an area where it's really prevalent. Make sure you're in an area where it's very clean. I'm not seeing like trash, or chemical contaminants around here. It's pretty high up a hill, so it's far away from cars, it's far away from people, it's far away from trash, and it's just really prevalent here. It's just really happy. It's just in its home. This is prime territory for Oregon grape. It's like the dominant understory plant here. And I could walk from here all the way up to British Columbia and be in pretty much in steady stands of Oregon grape. It's really prevalent in this area of the country. So if I'm in these type of areas, I feel I'm confident I can harvest sustainably because there are thousands of plants here and they're all doing very well. And I can harvest sustainably also by doing that method I just showed you where I replant part of it to allow it to grow back next year. Yeah, and so different methods of intaking it. The one I use the most is the tincture. So that's just an alcohol extract. I typically will take, this root or rhizome, and I'd cut it up with my clippers into small little pieces, or I could take a knife and clean off the bark. So I'll typically wash it off first, wash the dirt off, then I can take a knife and just cut off the bark if I want to. Or if I want to go a little bit faster, I can just like cut it into little sections. Then I'll just mix it into about 40% alcohol. Seems to do me well. 40% alcohol by volume, which is the standard for most of our cheap vodkas we sell in the store. Or if you want to make some with Everclear, you can just dilute it to a ratio that I'd bring it down to 40%. And that way I just have like a stored alcohol tincture. After it's been sitting for about 6 weeks, I can strain it off. I typically let it sit a lot longer than that. I usually let my tincture sit for about a year. I strain it out, and then I just put it in a dropper bottle, and I can just drop a few drops on the tongue. I can do anywhere from, if I'm just like looking for the more digestive aspects, I'm probably only going to be taking about 3 to 5 drops. If I'm like actually in a state of where I'm really ill, I'm really sick, I'm starting to get a cold, a flu, I'm worried I might have something I need to take antibiotics, then I'd start dosing up a lot heavier on it. I'd probably do up to 2 or 3 dropperfuls for those like more serious things, health issues. But as a daily digestive tonic, you can take it up to 3 times per day, just 3 drops before a meal or 3 drops after a meal. Seems to work really well. Yeah, another thing we can do, like I mentioned with that MRSA infection, I had it infused into oil, so I'd dry the roots, and once they were dried, I could dry them in a dehydrator or just set them out in front of the fireplace. And then I'd put them into a jar of olive oil and let it sit for several weeks and usually keep it warm. I'll usually set it around my fireplace. But you can find other ways. Some people use a double boiler, whatever works for you. And then I can simply apply that oil to the area or I could use that oil in the salve mixture. And there are videos out there for making salves, but I tend to like working just with the pure oil. So I just apply the oil directly to the area of affection. But I think there's another thing too. It's like some people like, it's like, okay, that's the right way to do it. But, sometimes people will be like, oh, but I don't have this or this and this. Whatever you can do to get the herb into you, if you need the medicine and you have the herb and it's in a different form, you can be creative. For instance, when I just chewed off that bit of the root, that bit of the rhizome, I've used this before. I've used the herb in this way before. There was one time I was out hiking with a friend, and they just started getting really like sweaty, red in the face. They had this like cold, pale sweat, and they like were like, okay, dude, I can't walk anymore. Do you have any food or something? Like, they just wanted something to bite. It was clearly there was something going on where their digestive tract just felt stuck. They just felt stagnant. There was something coming up. They just like, they were just getting hot and they just couldn't walk anymore. And I didn't have any food with me, but that just kind of indicated that there was something slowing down, stopping, making them feel stagnant, and they needed to get things moving, which is where Oregon Grape really works. So I just literally just did what I did there is I just pulled one out of the ground. I saw a rock on the ground, so I just rubbed the root against there to get the bark off. And then I was like, here, just take this and just chew on it. Just kind of chew on it and suck on it. And as long as you're getting that nice bitter flavor, you're getting the medicinal effect that you need. And sure enough, within like 3 minutes, he's like, just see this release on his face. His like skin turned back to normal. It wasn't red and flushed. And he was like, okay, I feel good now. Now we can go hiking. And I've seen it work in a lot of these instances where someone's just feeling like someone's really like constipated, or they feel like, they need to go to the bathroom. Like I notice it's a really good one for me. Sometimes like I notice like I'll have like these cravings for coffee, or I'll have a craving to smoke. And then as soon as I drink that coffee or I like smoke a little bit, I notice that like, oh, I gotta poop, and it's just kind of like this thing where it's like our body has this natural instinct, like I need to do something to get this out of me. I feel this need to excrete and to let things out. And, we find ways to do that. And oftentimes like those cravings for those things actually have to relate to like something more on the physiological level, not so the mental level, like we always like to think. So I find it's really good for that when you're just like at that, be like, oh, like something's not right. Oh, maybe I need to eat something, or I need some coffee, or maybe I need to smoke. And then you just like take a little Oregon Grape and you're just like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Then you're just like get that release and you're like, oh, so much better. So yeah, I just like kind of see it for those conditions where someone's just feeling like built up, stagnant, like things just aren't moving, things aren't just processing through the system, and they just really need that release and that relief. Yeah, because I think about that with like a lot of the bitters. They're just like kind of, you just taste that bitter flavor and get like shiver down your spine, just like, and then it's like kind of downward bearing motion kind of brings things down, helps to ground and helps to release. That's really where these kind of herbs really shine. This is where they shine, baby. Anything else I want to say? Yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah, I guess I see it with that Scorpio reflection, as well as that reflecting off into Mars, because Mars is so much about the warrior archetype. And so I see that reflecting a lot into our immune system, like being the warrior of our body, the guardians of our body. And so these herbs that help to kind of stimulate that kind of immune function through building up more immune cells, and like that efflux pump inhibition and antimicrobial compounds, really stimulating that warrior, protector of the body. And it also has that property too, where it helps to cool down. So someone who has that excess fiery warrior spirit can help to cool things down. That bitter cooling effect that sends a shiver down your spine. And those nice sour berries, the sourness is also very cooling, just relaxing, helps to cool down heat. So it's really good for excess heat. Some people say in Chinese medicine that anger is stored in the liver. So people with repressed anger sometimes find help through working with bitter remedies or remedies with liver affinities. So yeah, I see a lot of those correlations to the warrior archetype, as well as that scorpionic excretion, and Scorpio being ruled by Mars, kind of that watery aspect of Mars. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that sums up my thoughts on Oregon Grape for now. I could talk about Oregon Grape for ever, but I think I'll stop right there. Hope y'all found that interesting. Bye.